All right, you're live.
Good morning. I'm Vice Mayor Shanika Smith, the Chair of Public Safety Committee. I'd like to welcome you all to the April 26th meeting. All council members and staff are participating virtually. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have the option for the public to listen live by phone by dialing 855-925-2801 and entering the code 9477. For today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 9477. Your phone will be on mute and you will hear the meeting live. At this point, callers will hear for more options. Please press *3. Pressing *3 will allow callers to continue to listen live and join the speaker queue. As stated on the agenda, public comment will now be heard at the beginning and the end of the public safety meeting. Callers may comment only once during these general public comment sessions, either during the beginning or end of public comment period, not both. Callers will have 3 minutes each. We will be taking public comment after council and staff introduction. So if you would like to comment, please join the speaker queue now by pressing *3. If you're watching the meeting during the live stream while you're listening to the meeting by phone, please be sure to turn down the volume on your device before speaking. Now I'll go through and introduce all the committee members and staff who are participating virtually. Just give a quick hello. Councilwoman Sandra Kilgore.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Hello.
City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Hello.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Hello, everyone.
Police Chief David Zack.
Good morning.
Fire Chief Scott Burnett.
Good morning.
Division Chief of Emergency Management Jeremy Knighton.
Good morning.
All right, that's everybody. Now I'll go on to public comment. Staff, do we have anybody in the speaker queue?
There's no one in the queue.
Okay. We'll move on for the approval of minutes. Can I get a motion and a second to approve the minutes for March?
So moved. Second.
All right, I'll do a roll call vote for approval. Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
And myself, aye. Minutes have been approved. Next, we'll have an update from APD on initiatives for reducing gun violence. Chief Zack, he'll start us off with this discussion.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Several of our last public safety meetings, we've talked quite a bit about violent crime in Asheville and particularly gun violence. And during the course of those discussions, we've talked about developing a more robust gun or group violence intervention strategy. So what I was asked to present today was to kind of outline what a strategy like that would look like, and also some of the other cities that we've looked at to see where they've been able to make progress. So that's what today's presentation is all about. So first slide, please. So our key takeaways today is that group violence intervention strategies, they are not new. Of course, we've shown data several times now that Asheville has experienced a rise in gun-related crime, and that we have at APD made the reduction of gun violence a priority, but of course we need more help. We have seen some success in 2021, but for sustained success, we will require greater collaboration between APD and our community. Next, please. We've shared these statistics before, but we'll just quickly go over them again. And you can see from 2018 to 2020, we saw a significant increase in gun discharge calls in our city. And in 2021, for the first time in the last 4 years, we actually started to see a reduction, a 16% reduction in gun discharge calls in 2021 compared to 2020. So that was some good news. Next, please. We have seen, as we look through the first 4 months of this calendar year, we are again actually seeing lower numbers than we saw in 21, 150 year to date. We're now currently at 138. So that's continued progress. And of course, we hope we can sustain that progress. Next, please. Gunshot victims. Again, we saw 45 people were injured by gunshot in 2020, and we saw a 31% reduction in 2021, where that number dropped to 31. So we were very pleased to see, for the first time in several years, we were able to work diligently to get those numbers of gunshot victims down. Next, please. Year to date, unfortunately, between 2021 and 2022, we have seen a slight increase. So, of course, we're very, very concerned about that. Next, please. When we look over the last 5 years, the city averages 9.4 homicides per year. What we found is between 2017 and 2021, a firearm was used in 74% of the homicides committed. 32% of our homicide victims were offenders in previous firearm incidents. So that's a very important correlation to make, but also that drugs play a major role in the homicides that we've seen over the last 5 years. In 2022, we've had 4 homicides. 3 of those involve the use of firearms. Next, please. When we look at our success in clearing these cases, over the past 5 years, there were 48 homicides reported in Asheville. The clearance rate for those homicides during that period was 71%, which is 10% higher than the national average. In 2021, the national average fell to 50%. However, APD's clearance rate remains at 70%. In 2021, we did have 10 homicides. 3 of those are still currently open. Next, please. So as I said, group violence interruption strategies, there's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of cities who've experienced significant success. These are some of the ones that we've been looking closely at to possibly model a strategy for our city. But also there's a number of think tanks out there with a significant amount of research as to what can possibly bring success. So we've looked in Boston, Baltimore, Oakland, Buffalo, New York, which I was very familiar with, Philadelphia. And some of our think tanks that we've looked at, we've consulted research from Police Executive Research Forum. They're a police think tank out of DC, as is the Council on Criminal Justice. They're also out of Washington, DC. And the National Network for Safe Communities, that's out of John Jay College in New York. So those are some of your police think tanks. And when you look at these think tanks, what you, and the information and the research that they've done is that the strategies that they suggest and the ones that they've researched and developed, they're very, very close in design and in concept. Next, please. For example, the Police Executive Research Forum, their conclusion: a small number of criminals commit a hugely disproportionate number of all gun crimes, that most gun crimes take place in relatively small geographic areas, and enforcement strategies that identify and deter repeated gun offenders have proven effective. But it's important to build community trust and engagement, which can help ensure that community members will tell police what they know about gun violence and gun offenders. And we have seen even significant results here in Asheville, especially with our tip 411 help tip line that has provided a number of leads on a number of these cases. Next, please. Counsel on Criminal Justice, they say basically the same thing, is that it's important. Whoop, there's no information on that slide. I don't know what happened there. We lost. our
Let me
presentation.
try resharing. I'm not sure what happened. Okay, it's up there now. Give me 1 second. I'm not sure why it does that when we go to presentation mode.
We can just work off that, Jenna, if that's okay.
Yeah, and I'll try on the next slide to go back to presentation mode.
Okay, great. So again, the Council on Criminal Justice, their Violent Crime Working Group, pretty much the same conclusions. Identify violent groups, open lines of direct and respectful communication with those groups. They suggest establishing clear community norms against violence, but there's got to be meaningful support to keep group members safe, alive, and out of prison. That's our goal. With strategic sanctions as a last resort if and when groups continue violence. So not very far off the PERF recommendation. Next, please. This is from the National Network for Safe Communities. Community members with moral authority over group members deliver a credible moral message against violence. That law enforcement put groups on prior notice about the consequences of further group-involved violence for the group as a whole. But there has to be social service and outreach providers that make a genuine offer of help for those who want it. So all of these strategies in all of these cities, the information that the research groups, it's all very, very similar. Next, please. So what we need to do, focus deterrence, that's the APD end. That's what we're primarily responsible for. But to implement focus deterrence, it's very important that we provide proper training, close supervision, and balance. We don't want neighborhoods to feel that we're using these overbroad policing strategies, that we're occupying neighborhoods. So there's got to be a balance there in how we work. We don't want to be overbearing. But the key, our next step, is our community partnerships, because we cannot do it alone. It's up to law enforcement. Our primary responsibility is to identify potential victims of gun violence. But then, of course, we need our prosecutors to hold those accountable who engage in gun violence. But it's our community members who can help us be more proactive by getting to those individuals before they become victims and making that outreach. And then, of course, we need a research community to sit and identify maybe flaws in our system, but also to make sure that we're being accountable and that we're actually producing a result. Because if we're not getting the desired result, then we have to go back to the drawing board and develop new strategies. Next, please. Community trust is key, but it's not just the police department. This has got to be a citywide plan. There has to be funding. For example, in Portsmouth and Richmond, Virginia, they're actually paying people to go into the community and act as violence interrupters. So that's important. There's also must be anti-workforce development, where we have to not only, once we intercede or we identify potential victims of gun violence, we've got to provide them with alternatives other than just enforcement or other than just a warning. Our messaging has got to be clear that we're not looking to make arrests. That's not our goal. We're trying to prevent violence. And as I've already said, overboard policing approaches that fail to focus on the most dangerous people, places, and offenses are less effective and more likely to create unintended harm. So those policies or those approaches, stop, question, and frisk, saturated patrols, highway interdiction, those strategies in many instances have caused far more harm than good. So that's not, we want to have a far more targeted approach. We have to be willing to share information with the community on high-risk persons and locations so violence interruption can take place. And I've expressed to a number of community leaders that APD is more than willing to share that information and to work and try again to get to potential victims of gun violence prior to the trigger being pulled. That's our goal. Next, please. So who would be those community messengers? In many cases, and in other cities, they've proven to be parents of murdered children, people with lived experiences in the criminal justice system, people with credibility within the community, but also our social service providers who, when we go to have that notification and we go to have that sit down, again, it can't be just a warning that, you know, if you continue, you're going to go to jail. We have to provide an alternative. And those alternatives include education, employment, job training, emergency housing perhaps, or perhaps even relocation. What was interesting is we reviewed the group violence intervention strategy in Philadelphia, that when they went and spoke with those potential victims of gun violence, in 83% of those cases, employment was requested as a possible strategy. That's what people were looking for more than anything, was another opportunity with employment. So that's huge. Next, please. And of course, we need to identify that high-risk population. And APD, the District Attorney's Office and Probation, we've already been working on this to try to find out who is most likely to become a victim of violent crime. So again, if we're going to prevent violence, we have to know who those potential victims, and in some cases, who those offenders are most likely to be. And again, we do that, a collective assessment with APD, probation, and the District Attorney's Office to really assess the level of risk that one might have to be a victim of gun violence. Next, please. We brought this up in the past, and it's worth mentioning again. Also, an important component to investigation is enhancing your forensics capability, and APD has already done that with a huge investment in our forensics unit. We know that the same weapon is frequently used in multiple gun crimes. The technology has made it easier for us to connect weapons to multiple crimes. We've already done that in many instances. And just the importance of ballistic evidence in supporting the successful prosecution of an investigation. In addition, APD has expanded our number of forensic technicians. We have 2 more starting this week, which again will just aid us in investigation, giving us more time at the crime scene, and where we can hopefully build a better case, collect more evidence, and document as good as possible, which always helps when we get to a prosecution. So all extremely important. Next, please. So again, strategies are not new. There's a lot of evidence out there. There's a lot of cities that have had significant success. We believe we can be one of them. Although we have had a rise in gun-related crime, we are starting to see some results from the action that we have taken, but of course we need more help. And really the next step now is we need to get greater community involvement and be far more proactive. So we've done a reasonable job after the fact, after the trigger's been pulled, but now we've got to develop that strategy and work that plan to get to these individuals who are potential victims before the trigger is pulled. So that's really the next step in the strategy that we want to move forward with. So with that, I'll take your questions.
Sandra, you can go ahead.
Good morning, Chief Zach. First of all, I'd like to thank you all very much for this very informative report, because a lot of the things that they have talked about here are things that I've always felt was needed. In fact, the pathway for these young boys or in the street, a pathway to employment, to be able to take care of their families, that is what's most important. I've talked to a few actually members of my family actually has been in prison for drugs and things like that. And basically they all shared with me, Sandra, once I got myself together and got a job and I was able to take care of myself and my family, I would never go back. And they've actually reached out to a few young guys in the community to try to get them on board. And once they were able to get them on board, within a year, a couple of them were able to buy their own homes and things like that. So, and they were never going back. So I'm really glad to see that these think groups and everybody's has gotten together and they put out these reports. So it'll be a template or for all the police departments imagining a public safety, because I think this is key. And like you said, and being able to work within the community, because that's all people need, is to be able to take care of themselves and family. I think that's I love it. And I appreciate the effort that you put in this, and hopefully we can implement it and make some improvements within the city. Thank you.
Yes, and many of these cities report, anywhere from 20 to 40% reduction in gun violence when strategies such as this are implemented. And again, as I've said, law enforcement can only do so much. We don't want to engage in scared straight. That's not effective. It's part of the message, but it's not an effective overall strategy. But there has to be those other alternatives that we offer. We can't just walk in and say, if you continue, you'll be arrested. There has to be an alternative that we're offering. But also, you learn more often than not that the police aren't the most effective messenger of that. So not only do we need the infrastructure in place and the programs that are available and the direction to point people in, what's really important is the person who delivers the message. And our ability to not just address a potential offender and or a potential victim, but to get the family deeply involved and deeply invested, because in many instances, they're not aware of exactly what's going on or what that person might have gotten themselves involved in, especially, the younger the individual is. So we need the proactive approach, but APD can't go it alone. It's important that we build trust. And I think when you see our clearance rates, that we have had a significant amount of success in clearing cases, that's only possible when you have an involved community who's willing to help us. And we've seen that post-investigation, but now we need to see it up front and prevent the violence in the first place. But again, APD is not the best messenger. That's where we need that community involvement, and we need to find those community partners. And again, there's cities out there that are actually employing individuals to do that work. And I think that is something we definitely need to explore.
Chief, we've had conversations before about forming groups to go out in a community and get ahead of gun violence. But it seems like we hit some points of disappointment because these groups were working to have some type of autonomy from APD. Is there any design in these different think tanks where you see that nuance, where they're kind of working in concert, but have some autonomy so they, as community partners and community leaders, don't lose credibility in the community?
Yeah, I've seen, there are models where perhaps violence interrupters work outside of the police department, and then there is sort of a partnership. But again, what's the balance? And in some of these cities that we've looked at, and these are the biggest cities in the country with the most gun violence, kind of the co-responder thing seems to work well, where the police are sharing the intelligence. This is what we know. This is perhaps the beef that's taking place on the street. We've come across this information and now we want to share it with you, but we have to trust the person that we're sharing the information with. But we don't necessarily have to go hand in hand to meet with the individual. That's not, in some cases, some cities do that, and others they don't. But there has to be, and that's where research comes in. What's most effective? We can try anything and see if it works, but whoever we work with has to produce a result. And if that result is not taking place, well, then we've got to, reinvent the strategy again. So we're open to anything, but I don't think a successful program would be no involvement of the police and no involvement of the community. I don't see a ton of research where that has been successful. There may be outliers out there. I'm not aware of who they are, but what we've looked at, these are the major think tanks. These are the major cities, and this is what they do, and this is how they have had success. If we want to try an outlier strategy, well, then so be it. But if the police are going to share information, it will be with someone who we trust. I guess that's the most I can, elaborate on that.
No, I get that. But when you pose a question that came from these think tanks, like what brings the most success? And in our efforts so far, that has been a major block. Folks are like, I want to get involved and I want to help, but sometimes they don't know exactly how to. So, I was thinking about before this presentation, Ms. Campbell, Deborah, if there's an opportunity for the Equity and Inclusion Office, they have some very unique capabilities in that office. If they can kind of liaise this process, because it seems like I agree with you, Chief, it can't be complete autonomy because, what's the benefit of that? That, you all will probably be working against. But I'm trying to figure out how we can make this work where people feel like they're working autonomously within the community, continue their credibility for the bottom line. The bottom line is to reduce gun violence and get out ahead of things and put some proactive measures in place. Can we have a liaise process here?
Thank you, Vice Mayor, for that question. Chief, you may want to talk about the work the collaboration that you are having with the Equity and Inclusion Department. And Vice Mayor, again, you are absolutely correct in terms of we have some very, very unique and experienced individuals in equity and inclusion, and they are Black males, which helps us address some of the issues, particularly in Black and Brown communities. And so, Chief, you may want to talk about this, as well as Chief Burnett is having a lot of good success in working with the new equity and inclusion employees on hiring and all kinds of things. So, Chief, I'll turn it over to you.
No, absolutely. I think our new staff, we have formed a very quick bond with. I was definitely having trouble just because of staffing issues and bandwidth issues here at the PD, and even getting our Lights On program started. And we went directly to equity inclusion, and Marcus and his crew went right to work, and they're getting that program off the ground for us. So we're ready to roll that out in earnest very, very quickly. But had it not been for equity inclusion, that wouldn't have happened. So, and this is also a discussion that we have had that, and of course they're new to the city and they're getting their feet, wet as well right now, and kind of getting the ins and outs of Asheville. Of course, it's taken me 2 years to do that. But I think they're going to move a lot quicker because they're not dealing with the pandemic. So that's going to be, I think, a huge asset for us. And again, we formed a very strong relationship very early. And I think we're going to be able to work together. And there's no question, I think they will be of great assistance to us in identifying community members who truly want to help, not those who say they want to help, those who truly want to help. Because I think we've had some folks who early on said they were willing to help, but then backed away later. So I think, working together as a city, not just within the police department, but having other folks that we can assist, who can assist with the messaging and assist with the outreach. I think that's what's going to get us over the finish line here.
And I just want to reinforce what the chief said about working together as a city. We think that community safety is a city initiative. It's not an APD initiative. So we all are going to be engaged, particularly like in park and recreation. I mean, there are a number of things that we think when our departments collaborate, that we can support one another. And we know that this is an issue that has to be addressed by our entire organization, not just APD. And not just the city. We need also the county to support us.
Absolutely.
I have another question or comment. I believe last year we received a notice that 6 or 7 individuals in our community were identified as felons who were carrying guns. And it was a proactive thing. I think it was under Project Safe Neighborhoods. And I started to look a little further into Project Safe Neighborhoods and discovered that they deal directly with gun violence interruption, as well as reentry and more preventative strategies. So I'm wondering how we're utilizing, other arms of grants and programs to stand up a program around reentry and prevention, because I think we all agree that social mobility and economic mobility, as Councilwoman Kilgore was stating, is the root cause of a lot of this stuff. So are we doing our root cause work?
Again, I mean, the police department's primary role is enforcement. But we have been in touch. I just returned from Boston, where I was able to sit down with BJA and talk about grants, not only for programs that might assist with houselessness, but also programs for gun violence reduction. So Bureau of Justice Assistance is going to be involved, and we actually talked about bringing them out here and maybe outlining some framework for us to work off of. So yeah, we're not looking to go it alone. We're exploring all avenues, and of course, as I said in the presentation, funding is key, and there are significant dollars out there to assist and to help us build the framework out. But at some point, we can have all the money in the world, but then we need the human assets to execute the strategy. And I think, if we can find and identify those human assets, I think the funding and so forth that we put forward for this, whether it's funding that comes directly from the city or from other sources, I think will be very, very successful. It's just a question of now we've got to get the butts in the seat. And that's what we're working on now. But grants and funding are something we're always continually looking at and exploring.
And Vice
So
Mayor,
human asset, just a question. When you say human assets, you're meaning departmental staff.
I'm actually referring more to those community members that can help with the messaging. Whether, in some cities they're paid, in some cities they're volunteered, but they're community members who want to be active, who want not just to talk the talk, but to walk the walk. And we need to find, I know they're here, and we've just got to identify them and figure out how we're going to work together and what that would look like. And of course, we're open to any suggestion, but we have to get started. And like I said, we can have all the money in the world, but if we don't have the people who want to assist and want to work towards this common goal, I think our enforcement effort will only go so far, and all we'll be doing is arresting people. And that should not be the final solution. That should be the last resort.
And Vice Mayor, I was just going to add that both myself and the mayor, as well as Chief Zach, serve on a group called the Justice Resources Advisory Council. Mm-hmm. And we meet monthly, and there has been a strategic plan that's been developed, and the membership is intergovernmental, and we even have judges on this advisory group. that are looking at how do we do that intervention and that community outreach in order to, obviously, we're just trying to intervene and prevent people from being harmed, as well as to build their capacity as it relates to being self-sufficient. So I think the work of that group certainly will play into some of our strategic thinking down the road and actions that we may want to take related to the intervention aspect.
And
So
that was
there, I'm
That's
sorry.
where I wanted to go next, because I know Chief and some other departmental heads, they sit at a lot of tables, and I think we continue to get hit with this same block. People say they want to help, but they don't follow through, or people don't have the capacity to actually handle the weight of the work. So with JRAC and the Justice Initiative that the county is leading, where are we with those initiatives? Are they actually helpful, or are they so new that they're not really producing outcomes?
I think one of the challenges is we have been in the strategic thinking and planning mode and haven't kind of moved into execution. But I think that is definitely something that will come in the near term, we hope. The chief and I say all the time, we're kind of tired of talking. We really want to do something, and hopefully by the summer, Vice Mayor and the rest of the council members, committee members, we're going to launch something, and I hope that something engages the community and serve as a first step to building trust and hopefully provide some way to address what we're seeing is an increase in gun violence in our community.
I would just like to add that I did in Portsmouth, where they have the compensation plan that actually, I think that is something that we will have to look into. I think that could eliminate the issue of people being engaged and sort of falling off the ship. And reason being is because that's a lot of responsibility, and a lot of people that actually could be very effective in those positions actually themselves do not have, especially living here in Asheville, it's a struggle. If you're struggling yourself, it's hard to go as much as you'd like to spend the time that's necessary to actually affect the change you'd like to. So I would like to see in the future, as we develop these programs, we look into also some type of compensation for those that actually that we feel could actually be effective, but do not have the time or because of the economics involved. Thank you.
Kim, go ahead.
I'm getting feedback that members of the public are having trouble when they put in the code to join the meeting, that there's silence in the meeting, not a recording of the meeting. And that made me wonder if we're having issues with the public line.
I tested it before the meeting and it seemed fine. Let me try it again.
Okay. I appreciate the comments that have been brought here by my colleagues, and especially matters around compensation for community participants and autonomy. I've been following multiple programs, including the multiple iterations of ceasefire in Oakland. And it seems that centering the community members with lived experience and employing them for their work is critical to success. It's the two together. Instead of building a program for the public and then presenting it to the public, when we have the JRAC and the Justice Initiatives, are members of the community with lived experience being invited to the table in those initial conversations?
To my knowledge, yes, they are. This is a county-led initiative, but I do recall that we have had conversations with people with lived experience.
And then how are community partners identified, including youth mentorship groups?
I don't know about that, Kim.
Are we
can ask
doing
the
some of that
community.
work on our own to invite community groups or community members to the table?
I've done that. Yeah, I've had a number of meetings with certain persons in the community who initially expressed an interest with varying degrees of success. I've also talked to community members who expressed significant interest and then, again, just completely backed away and said, I'm sorry, it'll ruin my street credibility if I'm seen working with the police department. So that's been very frustrating.
So
That's why equity and inclusion could play a huge role in maybe making that initial and outreach in identifying the type of persons that we would need to do this sort of work.
I agree that Vice Mayor Smith's idea for the liaison through the Equity and Inclusion Department is wise. But what would that look like? How do partners get identified? And then on the other flip side of that, how can groups or community members reach out to the Office of Equity and Inclusion?
It seems like we have to design a program first. I think we're still in conversation about what to launch and how to launch. But I think what I hear you saying, Kim, is having an inclusive design as well, bringing people to the table to design what the program would look like, instead of having an internal process and then, rolling it out to the community to see who bites it.
Exactly.
And we are having
here every time that there's a new initiative is why weren't we at the table at the beginning? Because we could have helped to design this in a way that would meet the community's needs.
and we are having people go out and have conversations with as many organizations and as many community leaders as we can bring to the table. So yes, we are having those conversations and are doing the outreach, and they are helping us inform what type of initiative we would first start out with this summer.
Okay.
And I would just echo that, like, our community isn't that large. I believe that there are a lot of conversations with a lot of players on all levels, from community development to reentry to peer support. They're in conversation with the city manager and the chief, like at least on a monthly basis. But for whatever reason, folks are not buying in, they're not staying committed. And, that can look a lot of different ways. You can have the heart to serve and the intention to serve, but not have the capacity. Or you can still have some underlying issues, based on your lived experience, that's kind of, keeping us from coming together and really making things happen. But I would say at this point, it's kind of ahead of the summer months when our children are out of school and pretty idle. We're going to have to be sacrificial and make something happen. And if autonomy is the one thing that folks are staying away from the table because of, then we need to design a process where autonomy works at this point. But I would say if this community continues to cry for community policing and working more close with the police department, what more do you want? Like, we say this is where we want to be, and then when it's time to get there, we flake for whatever reason. And I'm not bashing you for flaking, because you might have strong justifications for doing so. But to me, it seems like we're talking out of both sides of our mouths. If we want community policing, we have to dig in and make it work. And all ends have to be able to make the appropriate compromise when compromise is safe and reasonable.
Well said, Vice Mayor.
Is there anything else we have? Boy, we have spent a lot of time here. Is there anything else? It was a good conversation, though. All right, thank you, Chief Zach, and everybody else. We're going to move on. Okay, next on our agenda, we have an update from Jeremy Knighton on the disaster recovery planning process.
Good morning, Vice Mayor, members of Council. I am Jeremy Knighton, Division Chief of Emergency Management. in the fire department. So today we're going to kind of we're going to walk through and hopefully answer some questions that have came up from you about disaster recovery, what recovery looks like, and that planning process, and how we participate in it, and how we can be that bridge and to connect folks with the resources that they need to recover timely. Next slide, please. So some key takeaways. We're going to work through recovery. I'm going to give you kind of an overview, and then we're going to drill down on some concepts and things that talk about capabilities necessary to assist communities, also as well as the incident types that we've recovered from, and then how we coordinate that prompt, reliable action information to the whole community to support that recovery. And then our ability to manage recovery begins with that pre-disaster preparedness, what we're doing during blue sky times that will facilitate and make happen a timely recovery, which builds that resilience that I'm going to talk about here in just a few. Next slide, please. So when we talk about recovery, there's a lot of resources that are out there for us. The FEMA and many of our national partners and state partners have give us lots of information. But as an overview, this is what we call the Recovery Continuum. And as we can see left to right in the preparedness is an ongoing perpetual cycle that we're striving for that constant improvement to make that recovery piece better, as well as being able to respond more quickly and effectively when disaster strikes. And you can see moving left to right, preparedness, of course, is ongoing. The disaster occurs depending on the scope and nature of the disaster, can definitely have a large impact on recovery. And then moving on into recovery, the short-term recovery, which is days afterwards, that after the incident occurs. And then we have that intermediate recovery, which is weeks and months, and then the long-term recovery. And many times, long-term recovery can eventually turn into a new normal for a lot of folks in our community. So, and then kind of on the vertical axis there, the size and scope. It's important to understand too that depending how complex the incident was, will definitely have an impact on those three phases of recovery. Next slide, please. So, kind of drilling down to that personal, on that individual level, in order to start this process of recovery, an incident has occurred. So, step one, as an individual, we need to make some decisions and do a really quick self-assessment. Number one, we need to find a safe place for us to go in the immediate aftermath of whatever has occurred. And this could look a lot of different ways for a lot of different folks. Whether it's a congregate shelter like we've seen in many disasters across the United States and even here in our community, where we're working with our partners, especially working with the county, because sheltering is a big part of that health and human service response during and aftermath of these disasters. Houses of worship, family and friends, is it hotel, motel, camp, maybe in some situations, depending on the severity of the disaster, it could be your car or where we work. If we're dealing with, and some folks, as we learned during Tropical Storm Fred and other localities really close to here, folks wanted just to stay in their damaged dwelling. And so a lot of decisions need to be made in that initial step. And what we can do is facilitate that good information and help folks find those shelters. And then, of course, support folks with information in that timely manner to connect and meet them where they are. Next slide, please. So step two, when we're kind of crossing over into that, the days and weeks, a couple of things we need to focus on is, and questions and more of that self-assessment. We need to return to work. Kids need to return to school while the home or house or rental property is being prepared. Maybe it's potentially we're looking for a new rental unit. So again, that self-assessment, that initial, how will we get to all these things? How will we get our back to normal? How will that connectivity be reestablished through food, transportation, medical, those needs. And then as we move through that recovery continuum, we're starting to see our partners, not only locally, regionally, but federally, start to come in and assist many of the volunteer agencies, those faith-based groups. And then individuals are able to file for assistance, reach out for those business loans, those housing assistance, rental assistance, and then file that insurance claim if they have insurance. Next slide, please. And then in the third step, we're crossing over that threshold into from the intermediate to long term. 1 month or less is kind of that typical, how long will it take to get my home repaired? The rental, are there rental properties available? 1 month or less. So we want to make sure that do we have any unmet needs? And at this time, we have folks from FEMA on site, and then if we're able to connect and folks with the information that they need to get registered through the different state and federal systems, we're able to help with connect and make that connection to those unmet needs, whether it's accessibility, pets, transportation, damage, repair, etc. And again, at this point in time, we are hopeful, and with federal declarations like I've talked about before, when monies and things are freed up. Most recently, we've seen the state with Tropical Storm Fred and some of the other communities around us have some money that's opened up for these unmet needs. Maybe we find someone that's not qualified into the FEMA system, that's not really qualified for some state help, but they're kind of in between, and they've opened up pots of money and resources to include those individuals as well. Next slide, please. So where does the recovery start for the city of Asheville? Obviously, in speaking about the recovery continuum and those 3 steps for individuals, what that looks like. Again, grants for temporary housing, home repairs, using those faith-based groups to come in and assist with that cleanup, clean out, securing property. Again, low cost loans, like we spoke about before, through the business loans, the SBA, and getting access to that uninsured, to help that uninsured property loss and to be made whole again. And also, as we've seen, disasters have become larger and more impactful. Lots more programs have also opened up, taking advantage of that mitigation money after the fact. And we continue to create on the federal level and state level more programs to help those business owners. And again, I've posted a link here that disasterassistance.gov has a wealth of information in dealing with recovery and how to access many of those resources. Next slide, please. So what does that aid look like in many cases? We've got federal aid, kind of 2 pots, federal aid, North Carolina aid, for anything from on the federal side to income tax assistance, housing assistance, and then to the state, housing repair and replacement. We've seen many success stories from Haywood and Tropical Storm Fred, and also funeral or burial expenses like we went through with COVID-19. So again, these resources are available to us, and in that individual assistance, 2 types of assistance like I spoke about before, and this is definitely for the individual and the individual assistance. Next slide, please. For us, as the city, as a government, as a local government, that recovery starts as well as with public assistance. And as the process that we're working through now, recovering from Tropical Storm Fred, getting made whole again, reimbursed for some of the expenses we went through with debris removal, those emergency protective measures, hiring folks overtime to go out and set up barricades so folks don't drive through flooded waters. Our water control facilities, many of the water lines that we have in our water infrastructure, when it floods and we have large debris movements, can get damaged, and that takes up staff time. obviously money to fix that. So again, the public assistance portal we're working through now with FEMA and our state partners to make us whole again. And also the Parks and Rec. It's very important about recovery and getting back to that new normal, that we were able to reestablish those connections with society. And a lot of that has to do with our parks and recreational facilities where folks can go and, have a place to relieve some stress and get out and breathe some fresh air. So that's kind of what it looks like, the public assistance side for us as an organization. Next slide, please. Again, we cannot do this alone. We're just one piece. And again, the whole community approach that we all have seen from FEMA and many of the federal and state messaging that goes out through COVID-19, through many of our disasters, it's truly a partnership. And in order to recover timely and build that resistance, we must take advantage of those partners that come to the table and maximize the use of available resources. And I've just listed some of those. I fear making a slide like this that I have definitely left folks out, but just to kind of give a snapshot of those partners that really come to the table and assist us as we navigate recovery, as we navigate response recovery, and then ultimately back to that new normal. So we definitely leverage those partnerships and rely on those relationships that we make in the during preparedness times to assist us when things can be bad. Next slide, please. So again, that the pre-disaster recovery planning, the planning process continues. It's perpetual. I believe Vice Mayor Smith participated in one of those events, the Buncombe County Senior Officials Workshop. And key to that was integrating and coordinating these planning initiatives among those partners. We do it within the city as a part of our all hazards planning committee, which is made up of city departments that we focus on issues. We focus on vulnerability assessments, what's happening, kind of a success story from that, integrating those planning efforts. Is we performed a vulnerability assessment a couple of years ago, and it really came to light that some of our cyber initiatives and cybersecurity was a big thing that everybody was kind of worried about and wanted some answers for. And we were able to complete an exercise, an IT led exercise to walk us through what would that look like and what would the support that we would be able to bring to the table, which really clears that up and gives us an off-the-shelf plan to engage when things like that happen, as well as weather emergencies. What are those vulnerable elements that we're at risk for living where we live, and what are the systemic effects of those disruptions, and how do we respond? And so also in that same vein as we have the Buncombe County Local Emergency Planning Committee, which is rooted in hazardous materials but also allows us another vehicle to engage with community members, engage with industries, and many of the local the community members to where we're getting that input and able to respond directly to their needs. And it's been really great interaction. Next slide, please. Key to this, key to our recovery and us being able to make that reestablishment and connection after an incident happens, is directly related to the manner in which we're able to respond. So how we recover is directly related to the manner in which we respond. And that pre, during, and post-disaster operational coordination by City of Asheville departments and external stakeholders is critical to us being able to navigate efficiently and effectively through recovery activities. We've seen this firsthand during our response as a city to COVID-19. Those all hazards planning committee meetings and some of those initiatives we participated in definitely allowed us to build resilience as an organization so that we were able to respond effectively. And since then, we've had many successes as we start to recover and move through that process. But at the end of the day, though, our ability to coordinate, communicate, and collaborate is what success looks like in recovery. It's what we define success as if we're able to coordinate, communicate, and collaborate with all of our stakeholders and community members. We can definitely paint a clear picture of what success looks like, which is critical to that recovery. And again, the key takeaway here is how we respond is directly related to the manner in which we recover. Next slide, please. So where do we start as an organization? There's two distinct plans that we've talked about, and these were both, I think, brought up on the county side and for us internally, is our emergency operations plan, and that plan defines the prevention, protection, response, those catchphrases that we use in emergency management that sets the stage for recovery. And that plan gives us a playbook so that we can be very comprehensive and intentional with the way that we respond, so that we build resilience within the departments. We return back to normal and continue to assist our community members in bridging that gap between when disaster strikes and recovery. The second is that continuity of operations plan. This outlines priorities and actions. We exercised this obviously during the pandemic, as folks were able to be flexible and nimble with the way we were able to produce our work and get things done to make sure that connection with society, and we were able to be that what our community expects of us and continue to serve in the manner that we have. These two plans, kind of where our gap is right now. The Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan was what it was called, and the last update to that was in 2010. There's been a lot of things happen since 2010. Many departments have been established. We've also, as many, and we're not alone in this, as many other cities and entities of government and businesses, when COVID-19 happened, we didn't have a plan for that. We had a one-page plan that gave us some information about this is what you do when there's a pandemic, and it was based upon the H1N1 flu, which we all, looking back over the past 2 years, know was woefully. We're not able to sustain that. It was far, far worse. And then our comprehensive or our continuity of operations plan, the last time we actually did one of these as a city was in 2006. Again, this outlines those priorities. How do we continue service? How do we continue to maintain and get members of our organization paid? And how do we maintain those services that our city depends on in times of disaster following some type of interruption? So I guess those are the two things that we want to focus on and that are takeaways from this, and that we can definitely point to recovery from these two plans, and these would both be critical to getting these updated and moving this forward so that we can definitely return our community members to that new normal. And again, find that resilience. These two plans are where resilience lies, not only in us as government, but as service providers and service connectors. Again, both are directly tied to that resource to need. We eliminate redundancy with these plans, and we are able to pick up the pieces and move forward. Lots of examples of this, but again, those are kind of where we would start and where we need to focus on moving forward. That is the end of my report, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have related to this.
Any questions?
This is Kim. I wanted to say thank you for this report. I really appreciate the partners that we have in this work, and for our staff staying in the practice of learning and adapting, especially noting the need to work with all community members. So thank you for naming that. I think it's important to review processes and hear and acknowledge the barriers that we might have created or maintained that stifles those community-led solutions. So how have we identified disaster recovery that can consider food system recommendations for emergencies, perhaps with our own Asheville-Buncombe Food Policy Council and or mutual aid groups?
Absolutely. We thank you for the question. We have worked with them. Me personally have met with many of those partners to talk about, and we brought those to bear during COVID-19 as the food deserts in different parts of the community, in our community as well as the county as a whole. I think how we responded to that, but definitely those are partners that we want to continue that conversation with. We've had those conversations. I think we definitely are able to manage each other's expectations. Very close, very good communication and coordination with those groups. I think, but a place for those folks to how we access that information, how we get to that information, how we connect that to response and recovery lies in these plans that I speak of here, and just those relationships and preparedness that we're doing when it's not raining outside or we're not under the heavy weight of a pandemic.
I totally appreciate that. And is it possible that we could formalize that linking up and overlapping work between the sustainability department and these departments to make sure that if we have a food action plan plus an emergency response plan, that we're all working from the same sheet of music?
Absolutely. And I think we have worked toward that with the sustainability office in the climate resiliency assessment that we did, that pointed to some of the vulnerabilities and some of the actions that came from that. But absolutely, that definitely want to have them a part of the conversation. And in doing a plan of this nature, they would definitely have a seat at the table. Because again, we can't do this alone. We have to leverage those partnerships and that expertise. But definitely those plans parallel. With the last meeting I attended with those folks, we had they were producing a graphic that talked about where we would get things. And questions they had for me was, how do we access large amounts of water? And how do we access really quick time, 72 hours worth of food? And what does that kit look like? And so being able to communicate those from the emergency response and that disaster response to them with their resources and connect that kind of in a pyramid, I think it's going to be really effective to exactly what you said.
Excellent. Because I know that in the very early stages of the pandemic, for example, there were nationwide concerns that, say, educational institutions, for example, might have like 5-gallon buckets of food, but then how do you distribute it to a single individual or a family? I, for one, would love to hear a report back on what updates to that kind of emergency plan and those overlapping work efforts look like.
Okay.
I have some questions. Whenever I think about preparedness and disaster and how horrific it can be, I think about Hurricane Katrina and how the response was pretty poor and the community was not self-sufficient to aid itself. So I really appreciate the work that's being proposed by Stevens-Lee, for Stevens-Lee to become, to be able to function as an emergency shelter and aid the community members in case of a disaster. So with that being said, I'm kind of looking across our emergency management service and seeing that there are a lot of shortages across our county. So that makes me think even more about pre-disaster preparedness and what does it look like to include community preparedness, facility preparedness, so that knowing that we have these shortages and we don't have a timeline when those shortages will be filled. In the case of a disaster, how do we utilize our city-owned facilities? How do we prepare community members to be self-sufficient in the area of food recovery, medical services, coordinating all kind of stuff, and then make sure our facilities also can aid community members in maintaining their basic needs, like showering, sleeping, that type of thing. So I don't know if that's really not a question, but just how do you vibe with that? Like, what are your thoughts concerning that, being that we do have some staffing stressors?
Absolutely. I think the one thing that we have is we have really good relationships. And so we have not only relationships internally, but that to your point, the planning committee that we have relationships with our Parks and Rec. Not only that, but with our Red Cross. So how do we bring those those organizations, those NGOs, the faith-based groups in there to pick up maybe where there is a gap? And we've seen tons of examples of that during COVID. They were able to step up, and many of those disasters that I've responded to myself to help other communities, and I think that's important. As I've gone to help them, they will come to help me and repay that favor, so that we're able to maintain what we have and give ourselves a break. Because you're right, there are shortages, but we have the things that the emergency operations plan and the COOP plan specifically can point to is we also don't want to waste any time or energy with redundancy. So if we have one department that's doing things and that can bring resources, how do we maximize those resources that we have here? How do we support them through our budget, through our planning, through our other initiatives that we have, exercising? How do we do that to make sure that they, number one, understand and know they're not on an island when it comes to disaster, that we have mechanisms and plans to support them, but we also bring to bear the resources that they have, because it's super important. All the departments within the city, all of our facilities, everyone has something to offer during these times. And I think COVID-19 was an excellent example of how everyone stepped up, repurposing employees, people crossing over departments. There were no boundaries. There was a need, and we all jumped in there to help. And key to that is having that coordination and that plan to where everybody knows where they fit in.
I look forward to being a part of and seeing these drills. Like, once the plan is complete, and we have community members and we're going through these scenarios, and community members and staff, they know exactly what to do in case of emergency. I think it's a community building exercise, and then it makes everybody feel more comfortable in case of emergency.
Absolutely, me too.
And if I could, one of the other key ingredients in terms of emergency response is leadership. And I want to thank Jeremy for his leadership. I cannot tell you, between Chief Burnett and Jeremy Knighton, in fact, the county asked, and I told the county manager, do not try to steal our personnel, because I'm going to get really mad at you if you do that. And Jeremy was one of those superstars that immediately set up the EOC for a joint city-county. Actually, it was a regional EOC. And I just wanted to commend and thank him, thank the chief, deputy chief, and I don't know Hedren's title, but him as well, because without them, this COVID would have been much worse than it was, at least in terms of our response. So thank you, Jeremy, for your leadership.
Thank you. We have a great team led by some great individuals.
Kim, go ahead.
I just wanted to note that we do have a new council strategic priority of neighborhood resiliency. And so as we're looking at running parallel work, just a reminder, because you already know the importance of that collaboration, both in the city with our residents and also in the region. If we had an opportunity to see like what some of those vulnerability index scores are, and then how we could match them up with the tried and tested things we know work well in previous emergencies, linking them up so we can get ahead of the game would be fantastic, and definitely would fit within the council's stated goals.
Absolutely, and key to that is that vulnerability assessment, right? We go through that so we know what to expect what we could be expected to respond to. And as a part of that inclusive planning process for both of these plans, that would definitely be included. Because again, one of the crucial parts to those teams are the individuals, their individual preparedness, and then neighbors helping neighbors. And when we get to that point, we're able to achieve resilience. And the farther we can drill down in our community to achieve that resilience, lays the groundwork for us and the rest of our whole response to increase the speed at which we can recover.
Sandra?
Yes, well, sort of, basically that was where I was going to go with that, because the outline of the program actually is very informative. And only thing I was concerned about, because being in an area where we are, where our housing basically is a real challenge. And I did like the part where you basically had the number one resource was individuals. And I was wondering, are we actually looking to develop some type of network of people in the community that we can sort of identify that basically would have the means to say, well, my home can accommodate XYZ, that they could sign up some type of network so we'd have individuals that we could actually go to for specific needs. And I was just wondering, is there anything like that that's being set up to develop an individual network that has accommodations that we can, we were not running around at the last minute, but we can build a network?
Not to my knowledge at this time, but I can tell you, as I was one of the responders to Haywood County for, as we all know, what happened in Crusoe. And one of the things that reassured me in that is my responsibilities there was working closely with the Health and Human Services, not only at the state level, but at the federal level. And then the programs at which the state was able to come in with a business EOC and essentially make those calls and reach out. And it's important, again, to know that where our help is and where we can access that help, and then what they can do for us if we're specific enough with our requests. And that was one of the things that they were able to do, was reach out to where can folks go? Because many times, as we all familiar, we're fortunate in the resources that we have here, but some of these communities, someone can't afford maybe to be in a hotel over here in Asheville because their school is still in another county. And how do we not break those bonds and things? There's a lot to consider with that. And again, folks like United Way, the faith-based groups, they have things of that nature, and they have things, folks to call and individuals that we can put into play to help us answer that during the storm. But I agree with you. It would be, an initiative that we could work on to see what that looks like, and also working with the county and the Health and Human Services, folks over there, where those connections are and where those connections can be made, and how can we reinforce that when things happen here, that we're not seeing those gaps.
Thank you, Jeremy. I enjoyed today's presentation. I'm actually passionate about that area, making sure that neighbors can help neighbors, and we're matching our resource to our needs. So I appreciate all your work, and stay on board.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Today was pretty good, guys. I really enjoyed today's meeting. We have public comment next. Jenna, do we have anybody signed up for public comment?
We do. I'll let you know when we get to the last caller.
Okay.
And caller ending in 9550, your line is open.
Yes, good afternoon.
Hi, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to extend appreciation for the Asheville Police Department, and to let you know, Chief Zach, that we don't feel oppressed, and we appreciate the presence of the police in my neighborhood, which is East Asheville. And my name is Chris Hancock, by the way. And I wish the city council would be a little more proactive with helping the police to have a presence just for the regular people in the neighborhood or in the city. I consider, and I'm old school, that that protection and security is really the historical main job of government, be it national protection or community safety. And what I'm seeing is when I drive on the roads around that there's very little enforcement. And I understand, and I'm all for the police, and I understand that you're 100 officers down. But I feel that it's dangerous not to have traffic enforcement. And I want the city council to take action with this to try to get the police force up to full manpower as soon as possible. What I'm seeing is that automobiles, which are dangerous, they're as dangerous as guns, in my opinion. Probably more people die from auto accidents than anything. But I'm seeing people disregard stop signs in my neighborhood, also all around the city. I'm seeing people disregarding their, running red lights more and more because they know that the police don't have the enforcement ability that they once had when they had full manpower. And I'm also seeing excess speed. So just wanted to put it out there that there are regular people out here that need and would like to have increased safety by the police presence and the police department being at full manpower. Thank you for the chance to speak today.
Caller ending in 7629, your line is open.
Hi, Public Safety Committee. This is Grace Martinez. I just want to say that I definitely agree that gun violence is a really huge concern in our community. It's something that we deal with in the community that I live in, and I really appreciate the words of all of the council members today about this. Even the chief acknowledged that police are really not best positioned to do this work of interrupting gun violence, and the idea of social and economic mobility was mentioned repeatedly, which I also believe is a root cause here. Drug and gun charges disproportionately impact Black community members because the police target them with investigative stops, while many of my white community members deal drugs with impunity, and it is legal for them to have guns because the Second Amendment provides rights for white gun ownership. Meanwhile, gun charges will further destabilize folks who are already living in economic precarity. I do not talk to cops. People in my community know better than to talk to cops. Police are perpetrators of violence. They destroy our communities. And I've witnessed that firsthand. I have witnessed gun violence in my community, and I do not call the police because they pose a danger to my community. They've broken up families in my community, harassed my neighbors with their constant surveillance, made folks feel unsafe. And as many shootings as I've heard and seen, I don't see the work of policing solving the problem. We do not prevent violence with more violence. We combat violence with peace, and peacemakers in my community do not engage with police. I support the idea of a community-led paid program, perhaps that can provide good paying jobs to folks who've been victims of incarceration, and that these folks work entirely autonomously from police because they do not have trust of us for very good reason. And as far as the police working with the city, I am definitely concerned that we're using city departments as an arm of the police. I have seen it with Parks and Rec as they've been working alongside police to extrajudiciously ban protesters from public parks in what I believe is a First Amendment violation. But to hear they're working alongside the Equity and Inclusion Department is deeply concerning because the work of this department is going to be crucial for building community trust and true community safety. And we can't build that trust with police who continuously break our trust and harm our community. We've seen again and again that the police are above the law, and we can't have the important work of city staff being tampered with. We are in a disaster when it comes to housing, and I wish we would use the same approaches. I really appreciated that presentation as well. I wish we'd use the same approaches and treat what we're dealing with as the crisis that it is, again, instead of using police who do things like target mutual aid. That has been filling the city service gaps. Thanks for your time and have a good day.
That was our last caller.
All right, any final comments from the committee or staff? All right, you all have a nice day. See you all in a few.